So we're live now, but we'll wait for people to show up.
Yeah, at least a couple.
Is that you?
Welcome, everyone. We're just watching folks stream in, so we don't want to get started too early. But thanks for joining us today. My name is Nancy Keneally. I'm the Director of Policy at AccessLex Institute.
And I'm Keenan Thompson. I'm a Policy Associate also at AccessLex Institute. And before we begin today, I just wanted to point out a few quick things. I apologize in advance. I'm going to be monitoring the questions that are flowing in. So sometimes I will be looking at you and sometimes I will not. So please don't think anything of that. Also wanted to point out that we have one of our representatives in the chat who may be offering links to things that we reference in the future, and his name will be Michael Russell. So if you see things from Michael Russell, you'll know that he is one of our representatives. And then one final thing is that there is a short delay on live videos, maybe from around 10 to 15 seconds. So give us a little time so that your question can come in and then we can answer it. But certainly as we do kind of this overview of what we get in today, start thinking of your questions and you can start entering them now.
Great, thanks, Keenan. So for those of you that aren't familiar with AccessLex, we are a nonprofit committed to improving and advancing legal education for students and society alike. And at our Center for Legal Education Excellence down in Washington, D.C., which is where Keenan and I work, we advocate for policies that around access, affordability, and the value of legal education that will help students.
And so today we want to talk about this thing known as the Higher Education Act, and more specifically, a bill that was introduced late last year known as the PROSPER Act, which is the House version of their reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And so before we get into that, I want to have Nancy kind of go over what is the HEA and why is it so important to us?
Great. So the Higher Education Act is the federal law that oversees higher education, and it's focused mainly on loans, grants, student aid to students to help them access higher education. And access has always been at the core foundation of the Higher Education Act since it was first enacted in 1965. The goal was to help students who didn't have the financial means to go to college. And bills like this, these large-scale reauthorization or bills, are reauthorized or rewritten every 5 years. Now, the current version of the Higher Education Act expired in 2013, so that means that it's actually 5 years overdue for reauthorization. However, there's no penalty to Congress for not enacting a reauthorization. It just means that the current policies that are in law will continue until they rewrite it. However, this is a missed opportunity for Congress to improve the way that students access higher education and how they pay for it. A lot has changed in the last 10 years since it was most recently reauthorized in 2008. So, I think there's a huge opportunity here for Congress to move forward and to make things easier and better for students.
So let's open it up for questions. And actually, let me just say, just before we begin, the PROSPER Act has a few things in it that we just want to quickly go over that would affect a lot of law students. And so one of them is that they would place a kind of new cap on graduate loan limits. Another idea is that they have eliminated the public service loan forgiveness program, and they've also changed how you may be familiar with what's known as income-driven repayment works. And we can kind of flesh those out clearly. So the first one is the loan limit has, for graduate students currently, they have a whole bunch of options that they can take loans out. But primarily, there's two different ones. They use an unsubsidized Stafford loan, or what's known as their direct unsubsidized loan, and also a Graduate Plus loan right now. And the Graduate Plus loan allows you to borrow up to the cost of attendance. In the new Prosper Act, they changed that to have an annual loan limit of $28,500 with an aggregate limit of $150,000. And so as you can see, that's a big disparity between borrowing up to the cost of attendance under the Grad Plus program and under this new kind of graduate one loan program. And then, as I said, they eliminate the public service loan forgiveness, which is a program that allows you to work in the public sector for 10 years and have the remaining balance of your loans forgiven so long as you're in the correct repayment plan, et cetera. And then you understand there are a whole host of income-driven repayment plans that are available to students currently with a myriad of different eligibility requirements. They would kind of narrow that into one specific plan that increases the amount or percent that you pay each month. And then it also gets rid of kind of this time-based forgiveness where current graduate students, if you're on the most recent income-driven repayment plan, is 25 years. After 25 years, you get your loan forgiven. They would eliminate that. And they substitute a different formula for that forgiveness. And so that's a high-level overview of some of the proposals that are contained within the Prosper Act that would affect certainly you as law students and others. So right now we can just open it up for questions. And it looks like we have a few questions. So let me just start with, so what would that mean for graduates if federal loans were capped? And so as I was articulating, in a scenario where you have the opportunity to borrow both of the unsubsidized loan program and the Grad Plus program, you can borrow essentially up to the cost of attendance. And that cost of attendance is, of course, set by your institution in which you are attending. But that means that you can borrow essentially, for tuition and fees, for books, for living expenses, et cetera. If your program essentially costs more than $28,500, whether that be in tuition and fees and all these supplemental costs, you would need to find an alternative mechanism in order to make up that difference. So you would go from having to, having the ability to essentially borrow under the federal loan program for up to the cost of attendance, including your living expenses, to now you have a maximum of $28,500 to borrow initially, and then you would have to find through whatever mechanism you could, that could be borrowing in a private sector, that could be putting on a credit cards. There's a whole host of other kind of options you have, but none of them are really as favorable as the current federal direct loan program. And so you'd have to find that supplemental cost in order to make up the difference. Okay, so we have a few additional questions. One wants to know how would the Prosper Act eliminate PSLF? I can't find explicit language in the repeal.
Sure, I can take that.
Okay,
so you're absolutely right. There's not explicit language in the bill that would say this provision is eliminated. How they do it is that right now, under current law, direct loan borrowers are eligible for forgiveness under the PSLF program if they meet the other eligibility requirements. So what they do is they eliminate the direct loan program. So essentially, the public service loan forgiveness program can continue, but eventually it will run out of eligible applicants because over a certain period of time, there won't be any direct loan borrowers left. So that's how they do that.
Right. And we should be clear. So we're going to talk about, they use this mnemonic of this one loan. So it is one loan, but it's in all capitals one. And so they replaced the direct loan with this idea of a one loan program. So when you guys hear us speak about this idea of a one loan, we are talking about this new replacement. And so as Nancy alluded to, the direct loan program would cease eligibility and you could only be part of this new one loan program. And that doesn't have PSLF associated with it. So the next question is basically how realistic of this, does this law have to becoming, or to this bill becoming law, because the Senate is working on its own version. And so we should just kind of be clear about where this is in the process of the creation of Prosper Act. So at the end of last year, the House Education and Workforce Committee passed out of its committee this Prosper Act. And so that is the first step that most laws take before becoming, most bills take before becoming law. They have to pass out of the committee. The next step is that would go to the House floor. Now, we don't know when that is going to occur. We've heard that it should come within the next few months, come to the House floor. That would then need to be passed in the House of Representatives. The Senate is also working on its own version, and we don't know what that will look like. In the Senate, there are a few different dynamics. You need because of Senate parliamentary rules, you have to have kind of bipartisan support for this type of legislation. So we don't know what that will look like, but the Senate is working on its own version. But the chairman has been very clear that he wants to have something out within the next few months. And then what would occur is they would also have to, quote unquote, mark that bill up, pass that out of the Senate, then they'd have to reconcile. So there's some things that have to occur, but we are assuming that they are going to move full steam ahead on both chambers. And so we can't give you a percentage, prediction about whether or not this is going to happen anytime soon. But given the unpredictability of Congress, we need to act as if this is going to occur.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Keenan said, we're not in the business of predicting what they can get done. But they've surprised us over the last year. Things that we thought would happen didn't. Things that didn't happen did. So, I think it's in everyone's best interest to act like it will, because even if it doesn't this year, it could next year or the year after. And so, putting your stake in the ground now, saying we don't support X, Y, and Z provision in the law, is really important, because you don't want to be, when they really are close to the finish line, you don't want to then be playing defense.
Right. And so we have another question. Why is Congress limiting how much graduate students can borrow?
Sure, I can take that one.
Okay.
So there are a couple of reasons. One has to do with a theory called the Bennett Hypothesis. And under this theory, the idea is that the more availability of federal student aid that exists, the more likely colleges and universities will be to increase their tuition costs. Now, the thinking in Congress and by other think tanks is that, if we just limit the amount of federal aid available, then colleges are less likely to increase their tuition, or will do it at a slower rate. Now, it's important to point out that the research behind this is very inconclusive. Some shows it does happen with certain types of loan and grant programs, but only in certain types of institutions. So on balance, it's inconclusive. The other reason is that some policymakers believe that while HEA is about access, like I mentioned earlier, that the federal role should really be limited to access to undergraduate education, and that, yes, there is reason to help people get to and through undergrad, but if students choose to advance their education beyond that, then it's on them, and that the federal government shouldn't have a role to play there, and that students can go into the private market, or they can choose not to get an advanced degree. But as we know, there are certain professions where an advanced degree is required, and we're seeing the requirement of advanced degrees increase over time.
And ultimately, as Nancy alluded to, that one of the reasons is to curb not only the cost of the institution, but to curb borrowing. You may have seen some recent reports from the department itself and the other government agencies kind of saying that the cost of this may not have been, especially for graduate students and income-driven repayment, may not have been estimated correctly. And so there's a push kind of to institute savings is one of the other reasons. Mm-hmm. So we have some other questions, and this student wants to know, is the cap of 28.5 for all graduate students or just law students? And so the answer to that is it applies to all graduate and professional students. Now, there is an exception for certain health and medically related programs, but they have always pretty much had an exception, an increase in theirs. But outside of those specific, very targeted increases, it applies to every single graduate and every single other professional program. So if you're getting your MBA, your PhD, essentially, all those things would be limited by this 28.5 cap. And so while we're waiting for a few other questions, I just wanted to kind of go back. Wait, looks like we have another one. So what happens if I don't get a private loan under the new proposal?
Sure. So, if you sort of max out at the federal limit, which whether it's 28.5 or something else in a final bill, and you go into the private market and whether it's poor credit or, the institution or program that you're applying to, we can imagine a lot of scenarios where students would struggle to get a private loan, or they may have unfavorable terms and they say, well, that's financially, that's not a good option for me. there are other options. Everyone's circumstances are going to be different, but at the broadest level, I mean, you could try to get support from your family, parents, grandparents, spouse, partner, other, may be able to help you financially, although we know that for many students, that's not an option. You may also decide to work to help pay for your tuition or living expenses. But that's a sort of a tricky tightrope to walk, because if you're spending time working, that just automatically means less time for studying. But that is an option for students. And then frankly, the other option is that you just don't go, you don't attend because you can't get the financing. It's just not there for you.
Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is what we would not like to see at all. Obviously, our mission is to have and promote access and affordability. And so we don't want students not being able to go simply because of the change in this law. And so we have really a great question that comes in. And so when would these changes occur? Would they happen right away? Like, when would this, implement? And can I, as a current student, still partake in the current direct loan program? And so the answer to that is that if this bill were to become law, let's say, it passed both chambers tomorrow and was signed on the president's desk, then these changes would go into effect on July 1st of 2019, meaning that the ceasing of the direct loan program outside of the grandfathering clause, would go away, and direct loans, the new one loan program would be instituted in July 1st of 2019. However, there is a grandfather clause essentially for those who are currently enrolled in direct loan borrowing. And so as a graduate student, as a law student, if you're a 1L, current 1L, 2L, 3L, and you have already borrowed against a direct loan program for a graduate program. So if you have loans for, as a 1L coming in or a 2L, whatnot, you would be grandfathered in up until 2024, if your program lasted that long, but it shouldn't. And so you would be grandfathered in those circumstances. There is one kind of tricky scenario, is that if at any time that you take a one loan, so as I said, if this bill becomes law and you, by accident or choice, choose to enroll in the one loan program at one point, then your benefits cease. And so you would be then subject to the caps, the annual caps and the aggregate cap at that time. And so if this bill were to become law and you're a current student, you are pretty much okay so long as you don't take out a one loan, because the moment that you take out a one loan, then suddenly, kind of all bets are off and you lose the benefits that you currently have under the direct loan program. So we have a few others. So how does this affect PSLF eligibility if I already have direct loans and I decide to take out a loan under this new law? Okay, so
I believe the direct loans would continue to be eligible for
right.
PSLF, but the new one loans would not.
Right. And so we have to kind of keep clear about what loan you're invested in. And so under the direct loan policy, if you have direct loans, those would be eligible still for PSLF forgiveness, but anything under a new one loan would not. And again, this goes to the tricky part. If, for example, you consolidated, if you got a one loan and then consolidated that with direct loans, then you would be not eligible for PSLF because those would be under the new terms. So stay away from again, that is all assuming this becomes law anytime soon. But if it does, you'll have to work it out with your financial advisor at your institution to really figure out what's the best option for you. But that's how that would affect. So we have a few other questions. So if a person is asking if they want to, Lamar Alexander has asked for comments on the bill. Do we have kind of support services to kind of help you out on doing that? So I should be clear. Lamar Alexander has asked for comments on a specific accountability proposal based off of a hearing that he had, not this week, but the week prior. And there are instructions, and we've noted, so on our blog, actually, we indicate that you can, how you can go find out how to make comments about that specific accountability proposal. But we do recommend that you get involved and invested if you're not interested in seeing some of these changes. We do have resources for students and FAAs if they want to get involved in writing and calling their member of Congress that we will get to in a little bit later at the end of this program. But we do have resources on our website, as you can see behind us, if you head to our website about how you can kind of get involved. But just to answer that person's specific question, he called for comments on a specific accountability based on a white paper that he released last week. Another question is, so why is there a risk that PSLF could be eliminated? And the short answer is that there are fears that the PSLF program can cost too much money, essentially. There is reason to believe that the PSLF program, as originally estimated, may have underestimated the cost, and essentially lawmakers are, if you're interested in saving the federal government money, PSLF is a right target. Now, we should be clear, in 2007, when the PSLF program was introduced and passed, it was passed by broad bipartisan support. The goal is laudable. You speak with lawmakers, they still understand that it's a necessary and important goal to put people in these public service jobs, whether that be legal aid, public defenders, firefighters, policemen, veterans. It is still a laudable and important goal. And so we are going to continue to fight to make sure that PSLF is maintained, but essentially cost and some have argued that the eligibility is too broad are some of the reasons why they want to eliminate it.
So I do want to say one other thing about to dovetail on that about the PSLF program. So the estimate right now by the Congressional Budget Office is that it would cost $24 billion over 10 years, which is an increase from what they originally estimated in 2007. However, the reality is that we don't actually know what it's going to cost. Mm-hmm. We don't know what assumptions the Congressional Budget Office is using in terms of how many people they think will participate and get forgiveness and what those debt levels will be. Because the reality is that the PSLF program, we only saw the first borrowers eligible this past October. Mm-hmm. And we still haven't seen information from the Department of Ed in terms of how many people and how much debt was forgiven. So for all we know, the Congressional Budget Office's estimate is overstating the cost. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the arguments that we're using with policymakers is that it would be inappropriate to make changes to a program based on cost when we don't have real clear figures mm-hmm. on what it's going to look like, because you have to remember, in 2007, this was only available to direct loan borrowers, but a lot of people had FELP loans. It was only available to people in income-driven repayment plans, but we have a lot more now. Since 2007, 3 or 4 other ones have been created. And so, our sense is that the first couple of years that people are eligible for the program, so 2017 and over the next couple of years, that it's going to be sort of a small uptake rate. And so, it really does remain to be seen how much this program will cost. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so we have another question. So essentially what happens next, or where is this in the process of becoming law? And so as I alluded to earlier, this passed out of the House Education and Workforce Committee and is now going to head to the floor. As I said earlier, we're hearing that the chairwoman would like to get it onto the House floor in the next few months. Simultaneously, the Chairman Senator Alexander in the Senate committee has indicated that he wants to put out a draft, hopefully within the next few months as well. Ultimately, that will need to be marked up, passed out of committee, and then brought to the Senate floor. If then both chambers pass their respective versions in their chambers, they would then need to come together to conference that and kind of reconcile the differences between those two. Then it would go back to both chambers, and then ultimately the president can sign it. So that does, it suggests that there is a little time, but we don't want to play it that way. We, as Nancy said earlier, things can happen in a hurry. If you look at what happened with the tax bill that was passed very quickly and became law within a period of, I think it was less than 6 weeks. So this could go in a hurry if they wanted to. And so we need to act as if it's going to occur, and we need to act as if it's going to occur quickly.
Yeah, and I want to say one other thing about I'm glad you mentioned the tax bill, because there were some provisions in the tax bill that would have really harmed students. that didn't make it into the final Senate bill. And, the sense around DC is that a big reason for that was because of the advocacy from the graduate student community. We saw news stories of people camping out in front of Speaker Ryan's office, in front of, at home back in the state and district, in front of their members' offices, and really making their voices heard. Now, I'm not saying you should barricade yourselves in front of anyone's door, but the sense really was that the graduate student community was a big driving force as to why a lot of those harmful provisions to students weren't in the Senate bill.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And we should replicate that kind of advocacy in this particular instance, because if we don't want to see these policies, so these caps, the elimination, they really do need to hear from you as constituents, as students, as FAAs, to talk about, this is why this policy would be harmful to me and those like me, and that this is not acceptable to you. And so we have another question about what can I do and what should I say? And so as I alluded to, you can go to our website, which is right there, accesslex.org/advocacy. And on that page, it indicates, we have an entire toolkit for you to use. We have resources. And ultimately, what we really would like you to do is to get up and call your senator or write your senator, because they're in the process, as we said, of drafting their version of this HEA reauthorization bill, and you can have an influence on that. And so if you head to our website, we have resources available for how you can find your member, how you can write them, how you can call them, what you should say. We have a sample script on our website. And so please head to our website and take a look at those resources, because you should just be calling and saying, hey, this is not acceptable. If you place a graduate cap or eliminate, and more specifically, I'm not sure that we talked about in detail, but the income-driven repayment. Currently the payment, the most recent incarnation of this, Repay, allows you to pay 10% of your income, and then ultimately your loans would be forgiven as a graduate student after 25 years. Under this new IDR plan and the Prosper Act, it's 15% of your income, and there is no time-based forgiveness. There is a forgiveness period, but it's a complicated formula. And ultimately, that means that education is going to be more expensive for you to go to school. And so you should call your senator and say, hey, I like going to school. I don't need you to make it more expensive. So things like that is the message that we want to drive home.
Yeah, and I just want to stress something else about in terms of advocacy. Again, we don't know definitively when this is going to move, but as Keenan and I have both said, you want to make your voice heard now. But another thing I want to point out is oftentimes folks whose members generally fall, on one side of an issue, sometimes constituents think, well, I don't need to reach out to that member. So in this case, it may be a Democratic member who generally, are more supportive of investing money into education. But I just want to stress that just because your senator or member is a Democrat doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them. Because the reality of the situation is when this really gets moving and members are at the table, there's a lot of negotiating and a lot of horse trading. And even though Democratic members may support certain programs, they may make concessions in one program. So let's say PSLF, maybe they think, well, I think PSLF should be maintained as is. If they have another priority, a higher priority, they may be willing to say, oh, well, we could narrow eligibility, or we could cap the amount of forgiveness in PSLF because I want something else. And if they don't hear from constituents, they think, well, that's fine because my constituents haven't voiced their opinion about this. So I just wanted to let you know that it's really important to reach out to your member regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, because the political reality and the logistics of this is that sometimes members, give up things in order to get other things.
Yep, and that's an extremely important. And so regardless of who your member is, your senators, please give them a call, whether they're on the committee or not. I think also I want to stress that is that you obviously have a set of senators who are on the current committee who have the first go at crack at negotiating this, but you also have an additional senator who is not on the committee. And so do not think by contacting them that is useless. No, because once we said, if this thing has to go to the House floor, it would be great to say, okay, well, the senators from the X, Y, and Z state are not supportive of this position or not. So, please, contact both of your senators. And so we have an additional question. And they wanted to know a little bit more about how this 20 to 25 year forgiveness for people with existing loans. And so just to kind of reiterate, if this were to become law, what would happen is under your direct loan kind of terms and conditions, you would be grandfathered into those terms and conditions. Again, with this big asterisk that so long as you did not engage in getting a actual new one loan. So if you stayed away from the new one loan program, you would still, provided you met all the other requirements, still be able to and be eligible for that forgiveness under 20 or 25 years, depending on, whether or not you're a graduate student or not. So if you stay within the direct loan program and this becomes law and you never touched a one loan, you, for all intents and purposes, would be grandfathered into that clause. But once you eschew anywhere outside of the direct loan and touch a new one loan, then you have a tricky situation. So again, you're grandfathered in with a big asterisk that so long as you don't go into the other loan program. Okay.
All right. It seems like we're slowing down with questions, but we want to keep it open for another few seconds. I know, as Keenan said, sometimes there's a lag.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So she asked, so what happens if you consolidate your loan after this program? So again, these are very tricky technical questions that the education department would have to provide guidance on. But for all intents and purposes, if you mix loans, meaning that, let's say you had a direct loan, you had a grad plus loan or whatnot, and then you had obtained a one loan subsequent to that, and then you consolidated them, then you would lose those those benefits essentially of loan forgiveness or whatnot. And so in theory, what you would want to do in those types of situations is to keep your direct loans entirely separate from the new one loans because they are legally different from their terms and conditions. And so again, we'd have to wait a lot from the education department. They'd have to put out guidance about how that would need to occur. And you would want to speak with your FAA at your institution about that specifically. But if these types of things did occur, you want to keep those loans separate. So this new one loan from your direct loans, you want to keep those as separate and far away from each other as possible.
Yeah, and just on that note, Keenan makes a good point. You want to, we're not financial advisors, we're
Right.
policy people. We're just letting you know what's in the bill. But for decisions like that, you really should be reaching out to your financial aid office. If you have a financial planner or your family does, the Department of Education, those are the places you want to go for individualized advice.
Mm-hmm. And so we have another question about taxable income as a result of forgiveness under PSLF versus the loan forgiveness. And so under PSLF, that is not taxable income under the IRS's rules, but loan forgiveness is taxable. And she wants to know whether or not that changes. And under the current, the proposed Prosper Act does not make any changes to that because again, PSLF would no longer be a thing under one loan. And so it is the forgiveness that you would receive, the kind of sort of forgiveness under the one loan proposal is treated the same way. And so there wouldn't be a PSLF distinction under the new one loan policy. And so the forgiveness that you receive under the one loan policy it's still considered
Right.
quote unquote taxable income.
Yeah, in the income driven repayment plans. But if
Yes.
you're grandfathered in,
Yes.
you would still, if you were grandfathered in and you had PSLF forgiveness, that would not be taxed.
Yes. Thanks, everyone. We're getting some thanks. So if there are no other additional questions, we really appreciate you guys, taking the time out in the middle of the day on the Eagles Parade to join us today. So thanks so much.
Yeah, and so if you found this helpful, please like this Facebook page so you can get more information. Share the video for friends who weren't able to make it but still have questions. You can also follow us on Twitter at AccessLex Inst. So AccessLex back there and INST. You can also just search for us on Twitter. And we also want to let you know that we're going to roll out a new blog series starting next week. We're going to cover a lot of these topics and how the PROSPER Act impacts them. So like PSLF, income-driven repayment plans, the cap on graduate loans. We're also going to have, as part of that series, a Q&A blog post. And we will incorporate some of the questions that we heard today. But if you have additional questions, you can post them to our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and we will sort of cultivate those, and we will incorporate as many as we can into this Q&A blog post. So you can find that on our X blog, on our website, and our homepage is accesslex.org. So thank you again. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We really enjoyed you. Have a great day.